Before we begin, there was a question that came back in the morning in multiple forms. Basically, there is a head of the state. He's not beyond fault. Exactly how does the system keep him in check? Right? It can't be just rule of law that does it. The head of the state is obviously obliged to follow the rule and then set a good example. All that is there, but if it doesn't happen, typically what happens realistically is he would lose credibility with his immediate council. If the council is beyond corruption, he would be corrected, right? If the council obviously has humans, it is prone to corruption also, and there is a clique that gets created which mutually corrupts, right? Each guy corrupts the other, then they protect each other's corruption also. Then the council would lose credibility with the citizenry or the wider state body, and in turn with the citizenry. So basically, which is what exactly happened in the recent example, right? The corrupt Indian state was pretty much the same. So it would actually devolve to the point of losing credibility with the citizenry. And then much bigger interventions would be needed to restore the right order and all that. So that happens, I think, regardless of what the model is, that is bound to happen if the top is corrupt. Fixing the top is not possible without incurring a big cost in any system. But the point is that, which is exactly why a very high premium is placed on getting the right guy to the top, which is an assurance, reasonable assurance you can have if the system is designed correctly. In a universal adult franchise, you don't have a very great chance of it, which is the main contrast. Neither being perfect. Okay, back to our session. So this briefly would go over the output format, the content format that we are looking at for what we have been trying to put up, the theory, and then get into the ontology of our theory. Basically, how the structure of our knowledge is and how is it even relevant to our project. Then principles of collective being and principle of transcendence, 3 being the most important elements to be able to build a theoretical framework. Then an associated subject is how do we read the texts and all that. I mean, of course, we have in tradition there is a very well-laid method, right? The Mimamsa is there, the methodology is there, but for what we want to do for the future systems, there are a few additional items that we would like to bring to the table. And then finally, the macro of how a futuristic or even traditional institution structure would look like. The Nigamagama traditions, we have these Mahasthanas, 32 Vidyas are there. There are many ways to, many schemes of organizing it. But primarily, the Nigamagama traditions, which we loosely call as Hindu, they do have a formal knowledge sheath and an orthopraxy, which basically has the axiomatic, and then what is around it is the body built up for a proper understanding and pursuit of that knowledge. This is one way of saying it. Otherwise, if we use a modern jargon of formal knowledge and a domain of applicability, there is a minimal set of irrefutable and irreducible statements which can be proved or disproved, have to be accepted as axioms for that domain, right? Which is what the Shruti is for the Nigamagama traditions. Because you can't prove or disprove it, but you have to accept it to accept the other set of knowledge in that domain. Everything else is refutable based on this, not just based on this, but including this as an axiomatic source. Obviously, there are other methods, right? The logic is, deduction is there. There are many ways to argue, prove, disprove. But among them, the acceptance of axiom is one of them, which
state few axioms according to, in this case.
The entire Shruti, right?
No. Not, Shruti in it, or, Shruti being axiomatic in the sense what? Can you give an example is what? And Shruti being axiomatic is a very vague statement.
We'll get there. The Smriti Prasthana is basically what is refutable and is deriving its correctness based on the axiomatic source. And then we have the non-textual, the pratyaksha, the deduction is there. In the absence of proper ways to validate these, then we also resort to informal ways, or let us say Shishtachara is there. What do learned people think about it? What do charactered people think about it? Based on that. So in the absence of a very clear method to establish, so we have semi-formal methods also. So this is what would comprise the inner sheath of knowledge. And then we have the outer sheath where, okay, we can see the diagram in fact. So this is how largely the knowledge can be laid out. As we go out, the outer the sheath, more the outer the sheath, the less formal the knowledge is in general. And as we go inward, the rigor of formalism increases. That's how it can be put. So the orthopraxy, basically the innermost sheath, is basically what the Shruti, all this is comprised of. And then the second sheath is relatively more syncretic in the sense that it has more temporal components. Let us say the Tantra is there. Tantra doesn't have as much longevity or permanence as the Shruti by nature of its maintenance and development. New books can come, new traditions can come, that can keep happening all the time. Whereas the sheath of the Shruti doesn't evolve as dynamically as that. And what that brings is syncretism, which is more friendly to the practitioner. Right? Without a very rigorous formal training, people can be inducted into practice. Upasana, Shastra, all these actually come in the second sheath because an interested practitioner, sincere practitioner finds this more easy to follow. And then we have the regional folk traditions. We can keep going outwards towards the periphery. More informal the knowledge will be. The important point to note here is that the sheaths of knowledge, in our case, largely also reflect the sheaths of the society. Or there is a parallel between how the society operates and how the formal knowledge operates for us. Formal and informal, how they are related in the knowledge sphere is also similarly how the formal and informal are related in the social sphere. So basically the way the urban, semi-urban, the rural, forest inhabitations happen and how they interact with each other, there is a clear continuity. And the continuity is visible in the knowledge also. Axiomatic texts usually are not updated. Now anyway they are not updated anymore, but there is a very tedious and rigorous process to it. Let us say one verse of a Shruti has to change, then there is a change of the ritual, corresponding ritual procedure, there is a kalpa change, there is a pratishakya change, there is an anukramani change. So a lot of additional work has to happen to ensure that this change is consistent, and this has to happen across the board, with the buy-in of everyone who is custodian of that knowledge. So that used to happen, now that doesn't happen anymore. But it is also in tune with the fact that such ritual changes, new ritual additions don't happen anymore in the Shrauta sphere. There has been some centuries ago, the Khila was added. Even they didn't try to touch the Samhita. But a lot of ritual additions of late have been less Shrauta in nature. Primarily the modern day Karma Yoga is the Apcha Marga, which is basically the Upasana Marga. more tailored for the individual rather than the collective, which also is in tune with how the public religion broke down in our country into basically religion is treated more as a private affair, personal and private affair. Now, is this a problem? Yes. Is this something that we have to restore? Does public religion have to be restored and all that? Those are all questions to debate. I'm not trying to make a conclusive statement here. But at different levels, obviously the updates are going to happen in very different ways. As the natural process of discovery happens, the updates to this structure happens. Let us say that the specific is usually discovered first, then over a period it gets generalized, then it gets added into a more root level. Let us say like Siksha gets added. So texts definitely evolve over time. This is one thing we need to get really. How the knowledge is organized in general. We know that these are schemes and all that, but essentially the entire body of knowledge is both one body and not one body also, because each tradition is custodian of one part of knowledge or one coherent set of knowledge, and it maintains its own knowledge. So it only cares about bringing consistency to that body of knowledge. And with this, what happens is it's a function in time, it scales in time because it is inherited, which means it gets updated consistently. It's not a post-mortem view of any book that we currently have. Every book that we study today is a living reality for us today. And for it to be living reality today, whatever updates it requires would be done naturally as by the custodians. So this whole, once we get into our knowledge as a knowledge of a living tradition, a lot of the notions that we hear because of the Indological viewpoints, let us say the notion of interpolation, later editions, right? All these things don't make any sense because this is not an exercise in chronology that we are doing. It's an exercise in the living knowledge that we. So, but across traditions, there are very well-laid mechanisms to engage and interact so that they enrich each other and they collectively contribute to the collective knowledge, which is basically one epistemology, one is the pedagogy, and the last one is the vada, or basically engagement, argumentation, logic, all these things. Tradition can be seen as a domain where it has certain set of knowledge which is internally consistent. So the completeness criteria is very, very different. We'll get to it in a bit. But consistency, just like modern knowledge, remains the criterion. Just that it is localized to that tradition and that body of knowledge. And each subject has its own epistemology, that is well known. So most of these rules do apply in all the sheets. It's not just that the consistency criteria are applicable only in the inner sheet. They are applicable in all the sheets of knowledge. But the way the knowledge is pursued and it is maintained and synthesized is going to be very different based on the criteria that we apply for the maintenance of those texts. And the ecosystem of sampradayas or the traditions is the most important thing for us to make sense of how this knowledge in general works, because each sampradaya can be seen as a domain internally consistent to itself. So as it conceives, it does contribute to the collective body, but it has its own set of refutable hypotheses, which can be called its darshana. Right? And then its own practical manuals, and then it's the apara shastra, that the worldly knowledge that it is contributing. Most of these are universal in consumption. It's not that Nyayika says that Nyaya can be used only by the Nyayikas. Everybody uses Nyaya. So the knowledge that they contribute is used across the board. Same with Mimamsa, same with Sankhya also. But the main hypothesis that they have in terms of darshana, what causes the binding and liberation, these premises are refutable and localized for that tradition. Other things that the tradition generates are for universal consumption. So it's a ideal mix that we have. And this life cycle of tradition is what makes the whole ecosystem living, in the sense traditions come and go, but the knowledge they generate remains.
That you made on internally consistent, I think that needs emphasis. It just got mentioned. Can you please elaborate?
So, yeah, I mean, many examples, but let's just take each sampradaya. Let us say Shaka is there. It has its Shruti, it has its own Kalpa, it has its own Pratishakya, its own Purana also. And its practicing manuals, which don't agree with the practicing manuals of another tradition. So there is no consistency across the board, and nobody cares what the other guy does. Every tradition is inward looking, they only worry about whether they are doing whether it is right or not. There is no attempt to reconcile and bring consistency across traditions, which is not exactly how the modern academics works, and which is the contrast that we need to understand. Because let us say the history is a very big battlefield for this matter, precisely because we have many Rajavamsha Charitras. Let us say Gajapati and Vijayanagara don't agree with each other, they are contemporary and disagreeing, but they coexist. And they are maintained in their own spheres. There is no internal consistency, there is no consistency between them at all. What they agree upon is that there is a principle of dharma. Each version tries to show their own kings as dharmic. But what does it really bring? What it brings is, through that internal consistency and anchor of dharma, they are trying to create a pedagogy using their past. They are not exactly trying to chronicle their history. So it is not historiography. But if you are to build a historic account, you will have to reject in parts both of knowledge of both these traditions, which is basically loss of knowledge. Loss of knowledge is loss of completeness. So the modern knowledge, in its craving for consistency, global consistency, it is actually losing out on completeness.
It is a very key point to reflect upon as a very important difference between Indian worldview and the modern reality, that striving for consistency in the modern world actually results in loss of knowledge, and completeness is lost. And the traditions of India strived for multiple traditions, but each to be consistent within. On anchoring only on consistency, they let others anchor together the completeness.
Just an addition to the inverted tree normally that we use for urdhvamula adhashakha. So another commentary of that is urdhvam unnatam moolam. So it's not essentially an inverted tree, but the tree as it is that we see, but the moola or the roots are more urdhvam, nityatvat, mahatvat cha urdhvam unnatam moolam. So that is also one another.
We know popularly in the modern scheme is refutability is a very desirable phenomenon, which is true to an extent. Because the ideal or objective is always to minimize the axiomatic. The more we can ascertain the correctness of knowledge, the more desirable it is. So the probability is given a high premium. Now, which also means that a lot of knowledge that is generated is theoretical in nature. We basically theorize, not just axiomatize formal systems. There is also some contrast with traditional knowledge in this matter. We do have theories, there are a lot of siddhantas, there is refutability to each of them. Darshanas, we can multiply countless darshanas are there. Each of them is a hypothesis that they have been refuted many times, re-established, all that. But we don't have theories for all the subjects. Itihasa doesn't have any theory, siddhantas. It's basically pedagogically stated. And a lot of subjects, while they do have refutability, they don't axiomatize all the knowledge. Each domain is not independently axiomatized. The entire body is axiomatized with one source. This is the very fundamental difference, because in the modern scheme, each domain, let us say, logic is axiomatized or arithmetic is axiomatized. So physics has its, I mean each domain has its own axiomatizing, which is basically saying that we don't have one holistic scheme of knowledge in the modern world, right? Which is quite contrasting in the traditional scheme. So this principles of collective being is one building block that is very important for us to understand to get to the theory of state. Because one is how we see the collective being, our samishti, and how we see the world in general. That drives our worldview. Right? So the cosmos, entire cosmos, we have the concept of Vishwarupa, and then the Purusha, primal Purusha, as it is stated as most devatas are actually seen as the cosmic forms also. Basically what we are saying is we see the entire cosmos as one being, which is the grand collective. And it is not an isolated conception. There is a gradation. There is the Samrat, Virat, Swarat. Basically from the human collective to the collective of mankind to the collective of species, there is a gradation posited in terms of consciousness levels and in terms of species, all the way up to the cosmos as one being.
So, does the cosmos as one being, or the state, if we talk about the state as one being, does it operate on individualistic morality? I mean, the ethics or the morality of its existence.
We'll get there.
Okay.
So why is this important? Why is this important is, in terms of formal knowledge, this establishes a very clear way for us to make our knowledge for collective systems refutable. Let us say, for instance, the Purusha is there, or Vishnu is there, enshrined obviously in the Shruti. There are descriptions given, which basically what is a statement of our worldview. Vishnu Gopa, he is the protector of the worlds. He has created the worlds, he has permeated them, then he protects them. Each of these statements look pretty, devotional, which is fine. But this is exactly how any system is supposed to work in the first place. How does the custodian of a system operate? What is his code of conduct? Which we see story after story, description after description, as an infallible actor, how he conducts, which is to be seen as an ideal set for the ruler of the human societies. So which is why the ruler as a representative of divine makes sense for us in this sense of formal knowledge. We are basically deriving the ideal for the ruler from the conduct of the divine stated in that way, which is basically how the cosmic being operates in our worldview. Now that impersonal, timeless, whatever statement is there is basically drawn into or translated into what is contextualized for human societies as visible in the Dharma Shastra. So if what is stated in a Dharma Shastra has to be refutable, it is refutable on this basis that whether it is an accurate restatement of what is there in the axiomatic source. But coming back to the collective being, the cosmic as the nature of the cosmic as a statement of our worldview is the powerful statement for us, because from that we derive how by reflection humans operate and human societies operate, and in general the world operates, and in general how the cosmic mechanisms work. And contextualization of that from the timeless to time constrained is what the activity of this whole Shruti to Smriti, all that work is. But what is the nature of this cosmic being, and why? How does it really matter to us? Why should it really matter? One is the principle of complementarity. What we can see across the Shastra, basically, the nature of the universe as it is stated itself. You take it in a unitary sense or a dual sense, doesn't matter. Essentially, the cosmic being is a harmony of the complementaries. At the root level, complementary duals, the Shiva Shakti, Prakriti Purusha, whichever way you call it. Essentially, it's a harmonious complementaries, duals, which is visible all through the institutions that we have created, right down to the individual, the head and center of the human body, then the head and center of the family, the head and center of the state, in fact, the complementarity of the state and society itself, and the complementarity of various groups of the society. At every level, it is stated as a harmony between the complementaries, which is the most powerful principle, because on the other hand, you see a contrast of a bipartite worldview where the duals are always in conflict and are not in harmony, which basically leads to the conflict, genocide, whatever forms it can take of displeasure, violence.
Is there an example of this part, this conflicting part?
So, what does the religion of Jerusalem do, or the descendants of it do? Basically, they have a bipartite worldview. It's not limited to the theological part. It's not just Christianity that is bipartite in nature. Communism is equally bipartite in nature, which is why they have created or done genocides, basically. And the intolerance of the other comes from the idea that the in group is always in a violent conflict with the out group. It's not just with the idea that there is an out group. You can be non-judgmental about the out group and be in-phased also. If you are not inward looking, if you state it in a way that the out group is always in violent conflict with the in group, that is when the problems come. The second principle of the cosmic being is that of the causation, and again causation is directly visible in the Shruti, primarily in the Upanishad, but the cause-effect relation is basically what it comes down to in the modern scientific explanation. And cause-effect, without cause-effect, there is no scientific explanation in the first place. So basically, it's built into the cosmic, which means that all the human institution design, human interaction is explained through cause-effect in our scheme, in all the traditions. No tradition says that this is what I am saying, this is a gospel, and this is beyond cause-effect relation. And the most important corollary of causation theory is karma. Basically saying that every cause has an effect, every effect can be caused to something else. Now, in what technical forms it takes, that's not important, but essentially this is causation, and all the darshanas are causation theories, though there are largely 2-3 families of causation theory, but essentially each darshana has its own variant of causation theory. So, as stated, the idea of protecting people, the idea of ensuring harmony in the state, the society, the ruler being righteous or the head of state being righteous, all these derive directly from the axiomatic source as ideal conduct of the divine being, which actually reflects at different levels of abstraction, first at the cosmic level, then at the Prajapatis, then the Devatas, and then the human societies. So basically at the different levels, how evolved beings operate. It's been illustrated quite clearly. So this is the macro or big picture view of how the institutions work. At the bottom is the micro view, which is basically the individual or the Vyashti. The top is the cosmic. Basically the Vishwarupa, the causation theory, the Varna, all these things come at the top. So this is one thing again I wanted to mention explicitly, because Varna or the anything that is manifest or Prakrita having a Triguna or will be having a Varna. That threefold consciousness qualities would be there in everything across creation. So it's not exactly that Varna is a construct of human societies in the first place, much less is it a social construct. There is a lot of confusion in what is a social construct and what is an abstraction, and which is exactly where the problems come. In fact, texts, if we survey, even do a basic survey of the text, nobody says oh, Vyavastha for these terms. There are Varna dharmas. What is organized is the groups, the kulas or the deshas, whatever. There are human organizations, and then there are these higher constructs. As long as we don't confuse them, we don't bring this into the how the operation of society happened by these principles and all that. There is, I think, maybe on specific examples we can clarify, but essentially this is a conceptual separation that we need to do at this point.
So, I just playing the devil's advocate. I mean, this is based on the fact that the ultimate purpose is to facilitate moksha or whatever of the citizens. You know.
No.
Okay.
Basically, humans have their purposes. They have different types of cravings. The state has to enable people for pursuing those and fulfilling themselves.
So what
There
if
is no judgment about what should be enabled by the state.
what if people, there's a critical mass of people, sufficient number of people who purely seek material benefits,
It happens all the time.
and what if that appends let's say the varnashram vyavastha?
See, enablement is not exactly normative that the state enforces you to do something, right? It's basically, do you have enough enablement in the current society to pursue what you want to? It's not as if the king is telling you what to do. You will anyway decide what you have to do and you will do that.
No, so I mean,
So material pursuits will always have enough incentive in all societies. The state will always encourage it.
no, because we discussed in the morning that we ultimately need to maintain order in the society.
Correct.
So if we are, let's suppose that we are assuming that one ashram vyavastha or any other social arrangement is necessary for stability in the society, and if the material desires and pursuits and the king enables them, and they in turn append or cause fissures in the social structure. Just let's take the example of alcohol, for example. So, I mean, that's a material desire. King shall enable them, but if that causes social fissures, so how do we deal with that?
So that is pretty simple. No? I mean, ultimately, somebody's freedom ends where somebody else's starts.
No, so
So basically,
is there a formal structure to defining where that freedom ends and begins?
that general principle is universal. It doesn't have to be specific to our society also. Essentially, if alcohol, anyway, there have been several policies around it, but
So
what is the outcome? What is the collective outcome? Essentially, what is the outcome in the society that is visible? Who is really suffering because of that? If there is data of that, obviously, there should be policy to ensure that suffering doesn't happen.
No, but this is a post-tragedy solution, right? Because we saw that this was causing some negative effects.
That's always how policies work. Policy is made based on.
No, I'm looking for a theoretical framework to decide at what point.
The more the state decides, the more you are going to make the state infinite.
Invalid.
Infinite.
Infinite.
So, as a initial principle, state has to be having a goal of being finite. Having an infinite state is really a bad thing to have. So
I'll give an answer from your standpoint.
Yeah.
Now, like say there is a pursuit of X, which it crosses a certain line, will cause harm to A, B, C, D. Like Shankar Garu said, state can step in, it's a modern reality, to say, no, I already know, I will not allow this. Or state can say, this much and not beyond. That's one way. The other way is if you let the society be, and if A, B, C, D components of the society don't want to pursue that X, then A, B, C, D will put their own structures of limitation to it. As long as the state is not entering it, that will work. What will happen is when state says there is an unbridled allowing of X because of individual liberty or whatever, that is that time that the ABCD will come helpless and are not in a position to stop it. So the hypothesis is that if you let all communities from A to Z to operate with their own volition and will, and if community X wants to pursue something that's going to harm everybody else, then A to Z minus X will bring their own restrictions and ensure that lines are not crossed.